I'm John Law, this is Chasing Cars, and this big bad boy is the Toyota Land Cruiser 200 series. Now, believe it or not, here in Australia, this was the third best selling vehicle in 2020, or at least in the last month of it, which I think is madness. It's huge. This particular model is the Sahara variant, and it doesn't account for all of the sales. A lot of that is in mining fleets, but still, it's crazy to think that this thing is outselling cars like the Toyota Corolla and Hyundai i30. So it stands to reason it must be pretty damn good. So that's what we're going to check out in today's video. Now, we know that the next generation 300 series Land Cruiser will be here soon, but there's probably going to be a little bit of reluctance and market lag as buyers sort of get used to the idea of that car's hybrid system compared to this car's more traditional powertrains. So we're going to take a look at this Sahara today. We're going to check out the interior and the practicality and then the driving dynamics. But this Sahara costs $126,000 before on-road costs here in Australia, which is hugely expensive for a vehicle that is basically a ladder frame chassis and has been around since 2007. Now for that money, you can actually get yourself a brand new Land Rover Defender. So the question is, does the Sahara offer enough luxury for it to be worth it? Now, outside this Sahara is a proper full-size SUV. That means it's nearly 5 meters in length, nearly 2 meters wide, and 1.95 meters tall, which is taller than me, which makes washing it pretty difficult. Of course, it has the benefit of giving you plenty of space inside this interior, although it does feel very much 2007 in here, just generally speaking. But that doesn't mean a bad thing necessarily. It just depends on what you like and how you like your cars. So this Sahara can be told apart by this 9-inch touchscreen here, which is actually pretty crisp. It's bigger than the rest of the range gets, and it's fairly responsive. It's a little slow on startup and can be a little annoying. It does have navigation, but there's no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, even via a wired system, which is a bit annoying. The other slightly annoying thing is that all of the climate control is done through here except for the temperature. So you sort of have to awkwardly navigate this menu, which I'm sure you'll get used to as an owner, but when you first get in the Land Cruiser, it's a little bit annoying. Now moving down on this sort of like robo style design, you've got your tuning knob and your volume knob, and then the CD changer as well, just above the climate controls, which just dates this car a little bit. And then below that, it's got one of the neatest little things I've ever seen in a car. It's the perfect size for a non-plus smartphone, for example. And inside there is actually a little wireless charging pad. So it's really cool that even though this car is dated in some ways, Toyota have sneakily updated it along the way to include some really clever features. Apart from that, we've got this very shallow bin because this Sahara actually has a cool box for storing your beers when you go camping, which is very nice indeed. You've got these two cup holders here covered by this little flip-up piece of equipment there, and you've got decently sized door bins that are big enough to fit a 1.5 litre bottle. Those 1.5 litre bottles will also fit in the middle of these two cup holders because they are very big, which doesn't make them much good for a small bottle because they rattle around, but this car is a big car for big people, and that means you're probably going to need big water bottles. What else have we got in the interior? As I said, the design is pretty dated. There are analog dials just in front of me here, which are quite attractive. They kind of have a Lexus look to them, almost watch-facey, although definitely more Swatch than Rolex. And between them, you've got a 4.2-inch TFT screen with readouts like fuel economy and your terrain controls, and it's also got a digital speed readout, which is always nice. The steering wheel itself is very, very much Toyota Land Cruiser. You've got these wooden trim inserts as well on the doors and on the passenger side there, which I'm not a huge fan of personally, but I'm pretty sure that if you buy a Land Cruiser, you've got to be a fan of wood trim. The size is okay. I would actually say it could do with being a little bit bigger, given this car's bigness and the size and that sort of chunkiness about it. But really, it does the job. You've got nice controls, and then the cruise control dial is back here behind that. Speaking of buttons, we've got a litany of buttons to control all of the functions in this car. They're quite confusingly laid out though, so there's not a sort of sensible layout of where all the buttons are, so you don't have all-wheel drive controls altogether or the DPF controls or anything like that. So it's a little bit annoying to get used to, but again, once you get your eye in, it's fine. You've obviously got most of the stuff that you need down here. You've got your 4 low, 4 high, which we'll get into when we take this thing off-road in a minute. You've also got these seats, which are leather appointed, and they're power adjustable with memory function for the driver, which is nice. You can get them into a pretty good commanding driving position with a good view out over that long bonnet. You've also got heated and cooled seats with an automatic function, and the general feel of it is very sturdy, as you expect. Perhaps you could do with some slightly softer, soft touch materials to make it feel a little bit more luxury, but there's always the Lexus LX 570 for those who want a little bit more opulence, or perhaps, as I said before, a Land Rover Defender. Now let's hop in to the back of the Cruiser, where the doors open fairly widely, and despite the fact that you might buy an SUV because it's easy to get into, this one's actually quite difficult to get into because of how tall it is. Now back here, there's a lot of content, but as in the front seats, it's very much 2007 content. So we've got these 2 screens, which are adjustable for the passengers. Now they don't have a DVD player inbuilt, which is kind of nice. You actually have to put an HDMI input in there, and you can select that with your own little remote, and they come with their own headphones. So passengers in the rear can listen to the same stuff that's going on in the front, or they can have their own separate entertainment, which is kind of cool. And as I said, it's better that there's an HDMI port, because I mean, conceivably you could bring a PlayStation back here and play some driving games if you really wanted to. Temperature controls are very straightforward back here. You've got heating on both outboard seats, and you've got your own climate settings and your own fan controls, which is always nice. You do have a 12-volt socket, but there's no USB ports to keep your devices charged. And the doors, which retain a soft touch fabric, they've got these nice little bits of bright work here and a very nice comfortable pad for your arm. Speaking of which, we have a central armrest, which has a sort of scratchy piece of plastic here to, I guess, put your phone on. You've got this fold out thing that is very flat, and I guess you could put a flip phone here. It looks like it's exactly the right size for a Nokia flip phone, which is a bit weird in 2021. And you've got 2 deployable cup holders as well. As for space on offer, I've obviously got plenty of headroom here, and I've got plenty of legroom behind this driver's seat. They are also adjustable fore and aft, and with the backrest as well. The only issue is, with my driving position in the front seat, I've got very poor tow room, which I don't think is a particular issue when you've got so much space, but still worth considering. The seats themselves are actually very comfortable though, so you'd be comfortable sitting in the back here for long periods of time. Now let's jump around the back of this Cruiser, where we'll suss out the practicalities of the boot. So the rear end of the Land Cruiser Sahara, as you can see, it makes me look short, which not a lot of cars do, frankly, so pretty good going for the Land Cruiser. You've got a fair bit of blingy bright work, Sahara lettering to let everyone know that you spent over $130,000 on this on the road, and the V8 to know that you're polluting nice amounts of diesel. Now I haven't got to the 3rd rows yet. We'll talk about that when we open up this power operated tailgate here, which is a nice little touch. You can disable that in the front seat if you don't want it to do that. You've also got this easy drop, really nicely sprung rear tailgate, which you can sit on, which is cool. Now, Toyota tend to do this in their Land Cruiser products. They've got side folding 3rd row seats, which to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense because it really encroaches on the load space, which is otherwise be really nice and square with 1276 litres. Now those seats, when they're in action, they are actually pretty comfortable to sit in. I can sit behind the middle row with the middle row 1 click forwards, so they're actually quite usable as a 7-seat vehicle, these Land Cruisers, which is obviously not that surprising given the huge size of it. But with those seats folded, you have a very small amount of space back here. At least in the rear seats, you get your own little aircon vents as well, and plenty of cup holders. You don't really have much going on under the floor here. In fact, you can't actually take the floor up. You only have a little bit of extra storage underneath these little neat sort of carpeted bits, which is clever. And then the spare tyre is underneath the rear of the vehicle, as you would expect on something like this. So let's close that power tailgate. Unfortunately, you can't lock it from the rear end. But let's close that and take this Land Cruiser Sahara out for a spin on the road and off the road. So let's talk about what this big old Land Cruiser 200 series is like to drive out here on the road. Now, we did take it off-road because it is a four-wheel drive vehicle, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute, but first of all, we got to talk about the on-road driving impressions, because realistically, that is where this car is going to spend most of its time. So starting with the engine, because this is worth appreciating, because there's not many more vehicles that are going to use an engine quite as muscular and powerful as this one, at least in this traditional sense. So under the bonnet is a 4.5 litre twin turbo diesel V8, which has been in the Land Cruiser for ages. In fact, since this car was launched back in 2007. There have been other engines offered in Australia. So initially there was a V8 as well, a petrol V8, naturally aspirated, and now in other markets outside of Australia you can get a 5.7 litre V8 that also features in the LX 570 here. But this diesel punches out 200 kilowatts and 650 newton meters, and there's history of this engine going on easy 500,000 Ks without really any major maintenance. So this is probably the one to go for if you're going to be actually using this car for what it's intended for, driving on the freeway and taking on some tough terrain where you might get stuck and need something that's going to be very, very reliable. And that's pretty much what this Land Cruiser is about. It's hooked up to a pretty basic 6-speed automatic transmission. It's got a Tiptronic mode and a sport mode. You've also got a couple of buttons so you can set it to start in second, or you can set it to give you a bit more of a punchy throttle response. But honestly, I feel like this car is absolutely at its best when it's in drive and when you're just cruising along, because there's just so much mid-range torque in this engine. You can ride on this wave of like, oh, it's lovely, and it sounds pretty good too. I don't know if you can hear that because the NVH is pretty well suppressed, but you get this really nice sort of deep, gurgly V8 note, which is, I'm quite a fan. I wasn't a fan initially, but you sort of grow to like it, and it's going to go missing when this car goes to hybrid. Let's talk about how this thing is to drive around town, because although it's not designed to drive in city environments or suburban environments like the one we're in now, the truth is that it's going to have to be here at some point, and you do see a lot of them just outside the centre of the city, so in suburbs around Sydney, and frankly, it's a little bit difficult. The vision is really good, you can see out really nicely, and this particular Sahara model gets a 360-degree camera, which makes visibility pretty simple, but it's a wide car. It's not so much the length, but it's nearly 2 meters wide. It's a really wide car to park on a small street, so definitely consider that. But it's not going to live in the city much. It really feels like it belongs out on the open road, where the engine and the suspension is really well suited to a car of this sort. It's got this really relaxed ride, nice and soft and cushiony. The only times that it feels a little bit uncomfortable is when you're, tackling stutter bumps, where you feel the stiffness of this ladder frame chassis sort of thump through into the cabin, and it's a little bit sort of, you're definitely reminded you're in a body-on-frame four-wheel drive, not an SUV, as you will. So you lose a little bit of refinement there. The suspension is definitely best hitting bigger hits at higher speed, where it really comes into its own, and the damping feels really adequate despite this car's near 3-ton mass. Now, the other thing that really impresses in this full-size Land Cruiser, it's also available on the smaller Prado as well in the upper grades, but is the KDSS system, the Australian design system that is basically a sway bar disconnect. So when you're on the road, the sway bars are connected. And what that means is you can actually drive this cruiser down a country road with quite some alacrity. It's not a sports car, and it's definitely got a little bit of body roll. I mean, a fair bit of body roll, let's be honest. But when you're driving at reasonable speeds, not trying to push this car too hard, it's actually a very stable vehicle on a back road, which is really impressive given what this car can do off-road, which we'll get to in just a second. First, we've got to talk about the NVH as well on the freeway, which is pretty well suppressed. The engine is the dominant sound in this car. There is almost pin drop quiet when you're off the throttle. As you can probably hear now, you can almost hear nothing. So the sound insulation is really good. The all-terrain tyres fitted to this particular one do have a little bit of roar at 110 k's an hour, but it's not a big deal. On the freeway, you're also not going to see particularly good fuel consumption. So over our week of driving, we've come to about 12.7 litres per 100 according to the dials. And even on the freeway, that doesn't drop much below 11 litres per 100. So it's a pretty thirsty old thing, and that's reflected in the size of the fuel tank fitted, which is 138 litres, which is massive. So the range is still about 1,000 Ks when you're roving in this car, but just be aware that you're going to have to fill up that 138 litre tank pretty regularly. And now we get onto the fun stuff, which is taking this Land Cruiser 200 series off the beaten track onto some dirt tracks. Now, to be fair, not that many people are going to be pointing their cruisers on technical off-road sections. And we did tackle a trail that I'd probably refer to as, I guess, a blue grade trail. A little bit tricky, but something that a standard four-wheel drive can pretty easily do. And the cruiser just walked up everything. It's got pretty much everything you could want. You've got a low range transfer case, you've got crawl settings and several modes that adjust the traction control settings. You've also got hill descent control and a center diff lock. So really the cruiser is equipped for that sort of stuff. And its broad track and long wheelbase means that it never really feels like it's going to be flustered climbing up steep stuff. The approach and departure angles are pretty decent. We'll have them up on screen right now because I can't remember that many details off the top of my head, but just know that this thing can handle pretty much anything that you'll throw at it. But of course, where it really is going to be used mostly is on high-speed dirt roads where it feels really well composed. As I said, the stutter bumps, as before, those sort of low frequency bumps do tend to whack through into the cabin, but it just feels planted, and the ESP system is pretty well tuned to allow a little bit of slip off-road before kicking in. So I found it to be really impressive and just a relaxed car in its demeanor when it comes to driving. Now, safety features aren't a huge strong suit for the cruiser. We do have blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert on this Sahara, as well as adaptive cruise control, which doesn't work very well, and a 360-degree camera. But this is the only grade to get that full safety suite, and it doesn't work particularly well. You can tell it's not quite as refined as modern vehicles. So, what are our thoughts on the Toyota Land Cruiser 200 series? Well, unsurprisingly, it's big. It also drinks quite a lot of fuel and isn't exactly the most efficient car. Honestly, there are a lot of other vehicles I would prefer to be driving for my use case, but I do see the appeal. The appeal in that luxury and being able to take it anywhere, and that really sort of loping, cruisy, big friendly personality it has on a country road. That 4.5 litre V8 turbo diesel also has that lovely little sound that lets you know that you're actually making progress. So I do understand the cruiser, but I don't exactly know why so many people buy them. Regardless, the next generation will hopefully address some of the issues we have with it, especially on the line of fuel consumption, because it will be a hybrid Land Cruiser. But I want to know what you think of the idea of this car going to a hybrid. Is it ridiculous? Would you still buy one, or would you not consider it because you're worried about the reliability? Leave a comment down below, and while you're down there, we'd love it if you could hit subscribe, that bell icon, and as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars. Hey guys, just wanted to say thank you for watching, and if you made it this far, why not click subscribe down below? And also, if you want to watch more content on vehicles like this Land Cruiser, we've got a bunch of other four-wheel drive reviews on the channel that'll be floating around here on the screen somewhere. And we've also got detailed car reviews on pretty much every car on the market in Australia right now, so click through and watch those. And as always, thanks for watching and have a safe drive.